OSHA has suspended enforcing the vaccine mandate on private businesses. That's after the Fifth Circuit Appeals Court temporarily suspended the mandate, calling it unconstitutional and staggeringly overbroad. Mixed messages. A bombshell report from a whistleblower suggests the FBI may be using counterterrorism tools to track down certain parents. That's after Attorney General Merrick Garland's testimony saying the exact opposite. And nearly 65,000 illegal immigrants released into the country without court dates. This comes as the latest figures on immigrants illegally crossing the southern border are out. In October, border agents encountered over 160,000 illegal immigrants. That is the highest recorded number for the month of October. Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Let's talk about that bombshell report where an unnamed whistleblower claims the FBI is using counterterrorism tools against parents who criticize school dictates. But before we get into that, what about the continued debate around vaccine mandates? OSHA has suspended enforcing the vaccine mandate on private businesses. That's after the Fifth Circuit Appeals Court temporarily suspended the mandate, calling it unconstitutional and staggeringly overbroad. The Labor Department affirmed in a statement in recognition of the court's ruling, saying the court ordered that OSHA take no steps to implement or enforce the ETS until further court order. While OSHA remains confident in its authority to protect workers in emergencies, OSHA has suspended activities related to the implementation and enforcement of the ETS pending future developments in the litigation. At least 27 U.S. states, as well as private employers, religious organizations, and other groups, have sued the Biden administration, claiming that it's exceeding its authority in issuing the mandate. White House officials, meanwhile, have continued to call on employers to adhere to the vaccine mandate for private businesses after the initial November 6th ruling. Now, let's turn to the whistleblower report. House Judiciary GOP released a new whistleblower document on Tuesday, making public an internal email sent by a member of the FBI's Inspection Division. The document discloses that the agency's Counterterrorism and Criminal Divisions Department created a threat tag called EDUOFFICIALS to track instances of related threats. Addressing its internal departments, the FBI's email reads, "We ask that your offices apply the threat tag to investigations and assessments of threats specifically directed against school board administrators, board members, teachers, and staff." The revelation comes after the National School Boards Association voiced claims of domestic terrorism. That's by parents who opposed masking policies and critical race theory in schools. Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a memorandum on October 4th, directing the FBI to investigate the alleged threats. Citing the leaked document, Congressman Jim Jordan wrote a letter to Garland on Tuesday. It accused him of lying to Congress when he testified last month that the DOJ isn't targeting parents who choose to protest at school board meetings. Senator Josh Hawley also called on Garland to return to Capitol Hill and answer for the allegations. He tweeted, "If this is accurate, parents are getting the domestic terrorist treatment after all." The FBI has denied the accusation in a statement to the Epoch Times, saying it has never been in the business of investigating parents who speak out or policing speech at school board meetings. And speaking of Senator Hawley, he just introduced a Parents' Bill of Rights Act. The act aims to give parents the ability to enforce civil rights against school systems receiving federal dollars. Those rights include knowing what children are being taught in school, knowing who is teaching the children, knowing who's getting school contracts and funding, the right to visit their kids in school during school hours, the right to all school records regarding their child, the right to know where data on their child might be sent, access to transparency and accountability regarding school boards, and the right to know about any situations that might endanger their child in school. Any violation of these rights under the bill would allow the parent to sue, and if there are major violations, it could lead to federal education funding getting taken away. And now, as for the parents, one mother says to remember who the real enemy is.
This thing that I did, apparently it has struck a blow against the communists, because that's who the real enemy is. That's who we are fighting against. Never forget who we are fighting against. This effort of indoctrination and sexualization of your children and the grooming of your kids, it is being done by the communists. And don't let this moment stop here. Keep going, keep fighting, because God is on our side. God is with us. And if you keep up the fight, we will not fail, because God wins, and America will never be a socialist country.
And as for the National School Boards Association, that's the group that issued its initial letter calling parents domestic terrorists, dozens of school boards around the country have cut ties with the group. Now, let's turn to another concern of terrorists, not domestic, but rather let into the country. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Tuesday. He kicked off his speech by saying the most significant and persistent threat to America is homegrown domestic terrorism. Senator Josh Hawley was concerned because not all of the refugees who recently entered the U.S. from Afghanistan had in-person interviews.
We capture their biographic and biometric information. We screen.
That's like a fingerprint.
A fingerprint, a photograph, biographic information, and we run it against our databases in our law enforcement intelligence and other holdings.
But you're not interviewing them, Mr. Secretary. It's not unless they're already in our database that you then bother to interview them.
Hawley said it was not enough to give in-depth interviews only to refugees who are already in the U.S. databases.
Do you know how many of the 9/11 hijackers, the 20 who tried to enter this country, do you know how many of them were given an in-depth interview by a trained official?
If I may walk through the process.
No, this is an important question. Do you know how many of the hijackers were given an in-depth interview?
I do not.
One. The answer is one. That person did not enter the country. The others were not given an interview. We know the outcome.
And what about the number of immigrants illegally in the country? Mayorkas says nearly 95,000 illegal immigrants were released into the U.S. interior without court dates. He said, "We have discontinued issuing notices to report." ICE had previously declined to say how many illegal immigrants received the lower-level notices, which directed aliens attempting to secure asylum to show up at an ICE office within 60 days of being released. Senator Marsha Blackburn said, "We still have a lot of people that we do not know where they are in this country." And as for the number of immigrants illegally crossing the southern border, the latest figures are out. In October, Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, encountered over 164,000 illegal border crossers. That is the highest recorded number for the month of October. The figure is also slightly higher than preliminary estimates and 55% higher than the previous high for the month of October. 2/3 of the illegal immigrants, or over 108,000 of them, are single adults. Only 26% came in family units. And unaccompanied minors made up almost 8%. There is a large jump in illegal immigrants who have been ejected from the country before, now trying to enter the U.S. again. About 30% of the encounters were with immigrants who had illegally crossed the border at least once in the previous 12 months. Of those encountered, authorities expelled over half under Title 42. This is a pandemic measure that makes it easier to kick out immigrants over concerns that they may spread the virus. But the numbers didn't include illegal immigrants who evaded agents. According to internal data obtained by the Epoch Times, that number was estimated to be around 50,000. Compared to September, the number of encounters dropped by close to 22%. The Biden administration is highlighting this decrease. Acting CBP Commissioner Troy Miller said October marks the third straight month of declining unauthorized migrant encounters along the southwest border, with particularly sharp drops in families and unaccompanied children. And now, before we end, as the weather gets colder, now is a good time to go hiking. That's because Wednesday is National Take a Hike Day. There are more than 60,000 trails in the U.S. National Trail System. Some of them are almost 200 years old and track the footsteps of explorers like Lewis and Clark. These footpaths can take you to cascading waterfalls, mountain summits, rock formations, dense forests, and every landscape imaginable. There are even more trails when you consider those in local and state parks. You're probably within a 10-minute drive to many of them. Hiking is great exercise that can burn up to 550 calories per hour. Now is the perfect time to get out there and explore. And after the hike, why not make some homemade bread? That's because Wednesday is also National Homemade Bread Day. In case you're wondering, National Homemade Bread Day has been around since the 80s. The National Homemade Bread Committee from Ann Arbor, Michigan, created it as a way to encourage family time. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning into Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.